Nuggets from the Golden City, a series of views of Rossland of yesteryear and the surrounding area as well. And for this series, our co-host will be Jack McDonald of the Rossland Museum. And first off, rather intriguing title, Jack, and you'll elaborate on this, I guess, to some length over the next little while. Rossland and the steamboats. How do you associate the two? Let's find out.
Well, Dave, I guess most people wouldn't associate steamboating with a mining town set away up in the mountains. But actually, as far as Rossland is concerned, this was the case. As you recall, when gold was discovered in Rossland in 1890, there was no transportation into this area at all. It was a bit of a wilderness. And the only transportation was the Dewdney Trail, which by that time had grown into an overgrown path that wasn't too frequently used. So as the Rossland mines began to develop, of course, it became imperative if they were to survive, there had to be transportation. So on looking down onto the Columbia River, 2,000 feet down below, the answer appeared to be right there, because that had been the route of the fur traders in the earlier days. And the fact that the Columbia River flowed past the CPR main line at Revelstoke.
This was before a trail was actually built.
There was no trail. There was nothing. This was a wilderness area in here.
Yeah, for those who are new to the area, Rossland came first and then came trail.
That is correct, right. Yes. And as I say, the Columbia River flowed 200 miles south and crossed the border to Northport, Washington, which was the end of steel on the Spokane Falls and Northern Railway. So it became obvious that this is where the transportation route lay. And as a result, by 1893, the Columbia and Kootenai Steam Navigation Company had been established, and they had two steamers, the Columbia and the Lytton, that ran from Revelstoke to Northport and were making frequent calls at Trail Creek Landing as the business started to pick up. So by that time, of course, too, they had built wagon roads down from Rossland to the riverbank, and there were fleets of ore wagons hauling to the riverbank and shipping the ore by steamer down to Northport and onto the railway and onto Butte, Montana. By 1896, business had become so brisk that the fleet of steamers had been expanded, and the steamer Nakusp was running a tri-weekly service from Arrowhead to Trail, and the steamer Lytton was running a daily service from Trail to Northport. And it's rather interesting. People coming to Rossland from Spokane, say, would get to Northport on the railway, and at 1 o'clock in the afternoon they would go aboard the Lytton, and 3.5 hours later they'd make it to Trail. Of course, it's all upstream.
It's quite a trip.
And there's several rapids in
yeah,
between,
right,
which
right.
they have to...
They must have had marvelous navigators in those days for these boats.
Well, these steamboat captains, they knew the river and they sort of steered by the end of their nose. That's about the only way they could do it.
Or the seat of their pants.
The seat of their pants. Finally, the Canadian Pacific Railway bought out the Columbia and Kootenai Steam Navigation Company, and they increased the size of the fleet. Of course, they were interested then of corralling all the business between Revelstoke and the border. And also by 1897, the Columbia and Western Railway had built a branch line from Trail here up to Robson, and that sort of ended the steamboating from Robson south to Trail, except for the odd excursion. But where Rossland comes into the picture now, this is where we come into the picture, is the fact that the first new stern wheeler that the CPR launched after they took over in 1897 was the steamer Rossland.
Had our own Navy.
We had our own Navy. And as a matter of fact, the steamer Rossland was the most powerful stern wheeler in the fleet. She could make it up the rapids without having to line herself up and pull herself up by winches, as the others did. And also, she was the fastest. She could turn a speed of 22 miles an hour, and this was never matched by any of the stern wheelers on any of the interior lakes before or after.
Just as an aside, something just occurred to me. Did they ever have races with these boats? Do you know?
I know they did on the Kootenai Lakes, where they had competition between the Great Northern and the Canadian Pacific, but to my knowledge there were no races on the Columbia River. It probably didn't lend itself to it too
I guess not.
But the steamer Rossland was pressed into the passenger express service on the Arrow Lakes between Arrowhead by this time, because the CPR had run a branch line down to Arrowhead.
Right.
And the Rossland ran from Arrowhead down to Robson West, which was the regular run, and she ran on that run for years, but business grew to the point where the Rossland had to be extended, her accommodation had to be extended, her passenger accommodation, additional cabins added to it. And at one time, they put her up on the ways and put a complete new hull under her. But she
They
still...
stretched it much like they do with the new ferries.
Yes.
Yeah, right.
And she was still the fleetest of the sternwheelers. Then she came to a rather tragic end. She was running with the steamer Bonington, which was a bigger sternwheeler, was the real queen of the Arrow Lakes in that respect. And during the Great War, they didn't have the crews to provide for all these steamers, so they laid up the Bonington and the Rosslyn at Arrowhead. And during the winter, it was just a straight case of neglect. The Rosslyn was allowed to pile up with snow on her superstructure, and she capsized at the dock and damaged herself to the point where she was sold off for scrap.
Oh, that was a pity.
However, most of these steamboats came to an end either by fire or breaking up on the beach, so I suppose the Rosslyn had to be a little bit different and end things this way.
It's a shame, though.
We do have pictures of the Rosslyn in the museum.
It was going to be a question I was going to ask you. Do you have some sort of a
We do. We have
remembrance?
pictures and a story in our transportation display showing the Rosslyn in all her forms of extension and final shape as she was. And she had made the odd trip down to Trail to pick up excursion passengers. They used to get on the train at Rosslyn and come down to
Right.
Trail here and then go up to Deer Park or some other beach for the day and then come back. But that was the career of the steamer Rosslyn.
Those were the days.
Those were the days.
Jack McDonald, and another nugget from the Golden City. We'll have more in this series as days go by. We hope you'll stay tuned.